At a family dinner, my sister proudly announced that Mom and Dad promised she could move into my 4-bedroom suburban house to raise her new baby. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, looked her dead in the eye, and replied that it was going to be a bit awkward since I had just sold that exact house to a corporate developer last Friday. I am Lauren, 34 years old, and I never thought a single sentence could unravel a massive financial fraud scheme targeting me and cause my parents' perfect family facade to collapse in a matter of days. Before I tell you how they paid the ultimate price, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to use the law to crush toxic relatives. You will not want to miss this ending. The tension that ultimately destroyed my family began at my parents' 38th anniversary dinner. We were seated at a notoriously expensive steakhouse in downtown Chicago. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the crisp white tablecloths, but the atmosphere at our table was anything but warm. I sat quietly analyzing the extravagant menu, while fully aware that I would be the one paying the bill at the end of the night. My mother, Brenda, dominated the conversation from the moment we sat down. Her voice carried to the neighboring tables as she loudly praised my brother-in-law, Donovan. Donovan is an African-American man in his early 30s who always wore flashy designer suits, drove a leased Porsche, and constantly bragged about his booming tech startup. He was married to my younger sister, Sydney, who at 29 was the undisputed golden child of our family. As the waiter poured another round of expensive wine that would eventually go on my credit card, my mother leaned across the table. "Lauren, you really should ask Donovan for some investment advice," she announced, ensuring the wealthy couple at the next table could hear her clearly. "He just closed another massive funding round for his tech company. It is incredible what true ambition looks like." I glanced at Donovan's wrist. As an independent commercial real estate appraiser and investor, I valued properties worth tens of millions of dollars for a living. I dealt with genuine wealth every single day, so I knew a cheap counterfeit luxury watch when I saw one. But I kept my expression entirely neutral, choosing to simply nod and slice my steak. Engaging with their delusions was a battle I had given up on years ago. In my parents' eyes, my independence was a direct insult to their traditional values. Because I was 34, unmarried, and entirely focused on building my real estate portfolio, they viewed my life as fundamentally lacking. They never missed an opportunity to remind me that I was the family disappointment. Meanwhile, Sydney was perfectly molded to their expectations, happy to live off other people's money while pretending to be a high society wife. Actually, Sydney chimed in, clapping her hands together with practiced theatrical enthusiasm. "Donovan and I have some huge news of our own. We are expecting a baby." My parents erupted into joyous applause. Waitstaff actually turned to look as my father Thomas immediately flagged down our server to order a $300 bottle of champagne to celebrate. I offered my genuine congratulations, hoping this new chapter might finally help my sister mature and focus on reality instead of appearances. But Sydney was not finished. Her eyes locked onto mine with a sickeningly sweet smile that made my stomach tighten defensively. "Since we are expanding our family, Donovan and I realized our downtown apartment is just too cramped." She continued, her voice practically dripping with entitlement. "Mom and Dad had the most brilliant idea. Lauren, your 4-bedroom house in the suburbs is entirely too big for just one single person. So we have decided we are going to move in with you next month." The table went completely silent, save for the clanking of silverware from other diners and the soft jazz playing over the restaurant speakers. I set my water glass down slowly on the white tablecloth, processing the sheer audacity of what had just been proposed as a casual dinner conversation. My father leaned forward, adopting his best authoritative patriarch tone, the one he always used when he expected immediate and absolute obedience from his daughters. "It makes perfect sense, Lauren," he declared loudly. "You are never home anyway. You are always working late at that office of yours. You can move your things into the small guest bedroom in the basement. Sydney and Donovan will take the master suite and the 2 adjacent rooms for the nursery and Donovan's home office. Family helps family, and right now your sister needs this space to raise her child properly." I stared at him, genuinely wondering if they had lost their minds. You want me to move into my own basement so Sydney and Donovan can take over my house? I asked, keeping my voice dangerously calm and entirely level. My mother scoffed, waving her diamond-ringed hand dismissively. Oh, do not be so dramatic, Lauren. It is not your house. We allowed you to live there because we felt sorry for you being alone at your age. But Sydney is building a real family. She needs the square footage. You have until the end of the month to clear out the master bedroom and make room for your brother-in-law. I looked over at Donovan. He was grinning from ear to ear, clearly already imagining himself playing the wealthy homeowner in my pristine suburban neighborhood. He desperately needed that address. He needed the facade of generational wealth that my property provided to keep up his fake entrepreneur lifestyle for his imaginary investors. I picked up my linen napkin, delicately dabbed my lips, and delivered the reality check they were so desperately unprepared for. That is going to be really awkward, Mom, I said, making sure my voice carried clearly and precisely across the table. I accepted a cash offer on the house last Friday. We are officially in escrow. The property does not belong to me anymore. The smug smiles vanished instantly from their faces. Brenda's jaw dropped open in complete shock, and Thomas's face turned an alarming shade of crimson red. They stared at me as if I had just spoken a foreign language. They had spent years treating me like a disposable backup plan, assuming I would simply roll over and surrender my assets to fund their golden child's lifestyle. They were so confident in their ability to manipulate me that they never bothered to consider I might actually take steps to protect myself. The silence that followed was heavy with impending chaos, and I knew in that moment the war had just officially begun. You did what? Brenda shrieked. The volume of her voice completely shattered her carefully cultivated, refined country club persona. Several heads snapped in our direction from across the elegant dining room, but my mother was too enraged to care about her precious social standing in that moment. You cannot sell our house. You have absolutely no right to make that decision without consulting us first. I will call our family attorney in the morning and have this illegal transaction stopped immediately. I picked up my water glass and took another calm sip. The sheer delusion required to maintain their lie was almost impressive. It has not been your house for 5 years, Mom, I stated, my voice echoing clearly and firmly across the table. You and Dad were facing foreclosure. The bank was 48 hours away from seizing the property and throwing you out on the street. I took my life savings and bought the house in cash to save you from total bankruptcy. You practically begged me on your knees to keep it a secret so you would not be humiliated in front of your wealthy friends. Sydney whipped her head around to look at our parents. Her eyes were wide with genuine shock. Mom, Dad, is this true? You told Donovan and me that you owned the property outright and that Lauren was just renting it from you at a discount because she was a financial failure who could not afford her own place. Donovan's face had gone completely gray. The arrogant smirk he had worn all evening was completely erased, replaced by pure, unadulterated panic. Wait, you do not own the deed, he demanded, glaring directly at my father. You told me the house was a hard asset I could use. You said it was your property, and that we could list it as the primary corporate address for my investors. Keep your voice down, Thomas hissed at Donovan, his face glistening with nervous sweat. He quickly turned his fury on me, desperate to regain control of the narrative. Lauren, you vindictive, selfish girl. How dare you air our private family business in a public restaurant? You will call your real estate agent right this second and cancel that sale. Do you hear me? You are not selling that house. We are your parents and we are telling you that the transaction is canceled. The sale is proceeding as planned, I replied. I allowed you to live there rent-free for 3 years so you could get back on your feet. Then I moved in when you decided to downsize to your luxury condo to keep up appearances. I own the deed. I pay the property taxes. I pay the insurance. It is my asset, and I chose to liquidate it. The buyers are a corporate entity, and the earnest money has already been wired into escrow. Brenda reached across the table and grabbed my wrist. Her manicured fingernails dug sharply into my skin, but I did not flinch. You are ruining your sister's life, she hissed, her voice venomous. Donovan promised his new investors that he had substantial real estate backing to secure his latest funding round. You are going to destroy his business before it even gets off the ground. I pulled my arm free with a swift motion, looking down at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel worthless. If Donovan lied on federal corporate filings to secure venture capital that is called fraud, Mom, that is not my problem to solve. And frankly, it is not my responsibility to fund a lifestyle none of you can actually afford. Thomas slammed his fist on the table, causing the silverware to rattle. We raised you. We paid for your life, and the minute you get a little bit of power, you stab us in the back to prove a point. You are a cold, calculated monster. Cancel the escrow, Lauren. I am not asking you. I am telling you. I stood up and reached into my purse. I pulled out a crisp $100 bill and dropped it onto the white tablecloth to cover my sparkling water and the small salad I had ordered. Donovan's business is a mirage, Mom, I said, staring directly into her panic-stricken eyes. And your lies are finally catching up to you. Find another place to live, Sydney. My basement is officially off the market. I turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving them drowning in the chaos of their own making. I stepped out into the crisp evening air of downtown Chicago and walked toward the valet stand. My phone immediately began buzzing in my purse. Text messages flooded the screen. My mother called me a sociopath. My father threatened to sue me for breach of verbal contract. Sydney sent a string of angry emojis followed by a demand that I apologize to her husband. I swiped the notifications away and handed my ticket to the valet. I had spent 34 years suffocating under their impossible expectations and relentless criticism. Walking away felt like taking my first real breath. The next morning, I arrived at my commercial real estate appraisal office, feeling surprisingly energized. I poured myself a cup of black coffee and settled into my ergonomic chair to review a new set of property evaluations. I knew my parents would not surrender easily. They had operated on entitlement and manipulation for decades, but I was operating on cold hard legal facts. At exactly 10 in the morning, the heavy glass door of my office suite swung open with a violent crash. My receptionist jumped up from her desk, but she was entirely ignored. Brenda and Thomas marched directly into my private office, their usual polished veneer cracked by absolute desperation. They looked disheveled as if they had not slept at all. "We demand you call the escrow company right now," Thomas ordered, slamming his hands down on my desk and leaning over me menacingly. "I spoke to our attorney this morning. You cannot sell a property that holds familial significance without consulting us first. We are establishing an injunction." "That is not a real law, Dad," I said, leaning back in my chair and crossing my arms. "I am a licensed commercial real estate professional. Do not try to quote imaginary real estate law to me to sound intimidating. The title is solely in my name. The transaction is fully legal, and the buyers are a major development corporation who will bury your attorney in paperwork if you try to stall their project." Brenda began to cry. There were no actual tears, just the manipulative, dramatic sobbing she had perfected over decades to get her way at country club board meetings. "Lauren, please. You do not understand what you are doing. Donovan is on the verge of securing a massive multi-million-dollar venture capital deal. He used the suburban house address on his official corporate filings to prove he was established and stable. If his investors find out, he is living in a rented apartment, and his in-laws do not own the estate, they will pull out. You are going to bankrupt your sister before her baby is even born." I looked at them with complete detachment. If your golden son-in-law committed wire fraud, he should probably hire a good defense attorney. I am not risking my financial future to cover up his lies. "Get out of my office," I said, my voice cold and uncompromising, "or I will have building security escort you out in front of my entire firm." My parents stared at me, realizing for the first time that their lifelong tactics of gaslighting and intimidation were utterly useless against a woman who held the deed. "You will regret this," Brenda hissed, her face contorted with genuine malice. "When you end up alone and miserable, do not come crying to us." After they stormed out, slamming the glass door behind them, a deep sense of unease settled in my stomach. My father's desperation had not just been about saving face or helping Sydney. There was a raw, visceral panic in his eyes that went far beyond social embarrassment. He had mentioned Donovan's investors. He had mentioned corporate filings. My intuition as a financial analyst kicked into high gear. I immediately locked my office door, logged into my personal computer, and pulled up my credit monitoring service. I always maintained a perfect credit score, an absolute necessity in my line of work. The screen loaded and my heart stopped dead in my chest. My credit score had plummeted by nearly 250 points. A massive red alert flashed across the dashboard, glaring at me like a warning siren. There was a commercial business loan taken out 2 years ago for $150,000, and it was currently marked as defaulted and sent to collections. My hands shook as I clicked on the details of the defaulted loan. The originating bank was a mid-sized regional lender based in Chicago. The primary borrower listed on the account was Apex Digital Solutions LLC. That was Donovan's supposed tech startup. But I was not listed as a character reference or a secondary contact. I was listed as the primary guarantor. My social security number, my personal financial history, and my pristine credit profile had been used to secure the debt because Donovan's own credit history was undoubtedly radioactive. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. 2 years ago, Thomas had asked me to verify some old tax documents for a background check related to a government contract he claimed to be bidding on. He had played the part of the stressed, overwhelmed father perfectly. Like a fool, I had trusted my own father and provided him with my updated personal information. He had taken my social security number and forged my signature to co-sign a six-figure loan for his golden son-in-law. They had not just lied to me about the house. They had stolen my identity, weaponized my financial stability, and destroyed my credit to fund Donovan's fake luxury lifestyle. I did not scream. I did not cry. The emotional betrayal was instantly overshadowed by cold, calculating, rational fury. In my line of work, numbers are everything. A ruined credit score meant higher interest rates on my own investment properties, denied mortgage applications, and a complete halt to my business expansion. They had effectively tried to burn down my livelihood to keep Donovan's ridiculous facade intact. I picked up my office phone and dialed the fraud department of the regional bank listed on the credit report. I picked up my office phone and dialed the direct extension for the lead investigator at the regional bank fraud division. It was time to strike back today. "Ma'am, if you did not authorize this loan, you are the victim of severe identity theft," the investigator stated over the phone. "You need to file a police report immediately. Without a police report, you are legally liable for the $150,000 balance, plus all accumulating interest and late penalties." "I am filing the report today," I replied, my voice steady. "Freeze the account. Flag it for federal fraud investigation. I will have my attorney forward you the case number before the end of business today." I hung up and immediately contacted Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. I placed a hard security freeze on my entire credit profile, locking down my financial identity so they could not open any more fraudulent accounts. Then I called my personal attorney. He was a ruthless corporate litigator who specialized in financial fraud, the kind of lawyer who ate cases like this for breakfast. The war had just escalated from petty family drama to federal crimes, and I was going to ensure my parents and Donovan faced every single consequence. I drove straight to my attorney's office that afternoon. Sitting in his sleek conference room overlooking the Chicago skyline, I laid out every piece of evidence I had gathered. The bank statements, the IP address trace, and the timeline of Donovan's supposed business ventures compared to the date the loan was originated. My lawyer examined the documents with a predatory gleam in his eye. "Your father committed felony identity theft and wire fraud," my lawyer explained, taking meticulous notes on a legal pad. "By forging your electronic signature to secure capital across state lines, he has opened himself up to federal prosecution. And if your brother-in-law was complicit in utilizing those funds, knowing they were secured fraudulently, he is an accessory to the fraud. We are going to bury them." We drafted a comprehensive police report and submitted it directly to the Financial Crimes Division of the Chicago Police Department. We also filed a formal complaint with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to ensure the fraudulent debt would be scrubbed from my credit history. I provided the police with my father's address, Donovan's company information, and the digital footprint provided by the bank. As I walked out of the police precinct with a stamped official copy of my identity theft report, the cool afternoon breeze felt sharp against my face. I was officially pressing charges against my own father. A part of me wondered if I was taking this too far, But then I remembered the smug look on Donovan's face at the restaurant. I remembered my mother calling me a monster while defending a man who was actively draining my financial future. I pushed the hesitation away. They had made their choices, now they would reap the rewards. My phone buzzed violently in my pocket, pulling me from my thoughts. It was a push notification from my home security system. I had installed high-definition cameras around my suburban property months ago. The alert on my screen read, "Motion detected at the front driveway." I opened the live camera feed on my phone, expecting to see a delivery driver or a neighborhood kid cutting across the lawn. Instead, the screen showed a massive moving truck backing aggressively into my driveway. The truck crushed the edge of my manicured flower bed as it lurched to a halt. The driver's side door swung open and Donovan jumped out holding a heavy steel crowbar. A second later, Sydney waddled out of the passenger side carrying two large cardboard boxes. They were actually trying to break into my house. I watched the live feed in utter disbelief, my feet glued to the concrete outside the police station. Donovan confidently walked up to my front door and violently jammed the crowbar into the doorframe, attempting to pry the smart lock open. I was putting his entire body weight into it, splintering the expensive mahogany trim. In the United States, squatters' rights are a notorious legal nightmare. If someone physically moves their belongings into a property, establishes utility bills in their name, or even just receives mail at the address, they can legally claim tenant rights. Once those rights are established, the police cannot simply remove them for trespassing. The homeowner must go through a grueling, expensive, months-long civil eviction process in court. Donovan knew exactly what he was doing. With the house in escrow and closing scheduled in just a few days, he was trying to establish physical occupancy by force. If the buyer's inspector drove by for a final walkthrough and found people living in the house, the title company would refuse to clear the deed. The corporate buyers would instantly pull their cash offer rather than deal with entrenched squatters, and the sale would completely collapse. Donovan was trying to hold my property hostage to force me into submission. I did not call my parents to reason with them. I did not call Sydney to beg her to stop. I dialed 911. I have a live security feed of a man actively using a crowbar to break into my property. I told the emergency dispatcher, keeping my voice steady while my heart hammered against my ribs. I am the legal homeowner. The property is vacant and pending sale. I am en route with the deed and my identification. Please send officers immediately. I sprinted to my car, tossing the certified copy of my identity theft report onto the passenger seat right next to the heavy manila folder that contained the original deed to my house. My hands were shaking not from fear, but from the massive surge of adrenaline pumping through my veins. I threw the car into drive and sped out of the police station parking lot. The drive to my suburban neighborhood usually took 30 minutes in afternoon traffic. I made it in 15. My mind was racing the entire way. Donovan was not just trying to steal a house, he was trying to secure a physical fortress to protect his crumbling web of lies. If he managed to get inside and change the locks before the police arrived, the nightmare would stretch on for months. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, praying the officers would beat me there. As I turned onto my tree-lined street, the flashing red and blue lights of two police cruisers illuminated the manicured lawns. The officers had just arrived and swerved their vehicles into my driveway, blocking the massive moving truck from reversing. I slammed on my brakes, parking my car horizontally across the curb to completely box them in. I grabbed my documents and stepped out of the vehicle. Donovan was still on the porch. He had managed to severely splinter the door frame, but my reinforced heavy-duty deadbolt had held strong against the crowbar. When he saw the flashing lights, he froze completely. The arrogant, untouchable tech CEO persona vanished in an instant, replaced by the terrifying realization that he was caught red-handed committing a felony in broad daylight. "Put the crowbar down and step away from the door," the lead police officer commanded. His hand was resting firmly on his holstered weapon. "Turn around and place your hands on the brick wall. Do it right now." Donovan immediately dropped the heavy steel tool. It clattered loudly against the concrete porch. He raised his hands in the air, his eyes darting frantically between the two officers. "Officer, wait. This is a huge misunderstanding," he stammered, his voice cracking with panic. This is my family's house. We are just moving in today. I simply lost my key, and I was trying to get inside so my pregnant wife could sit down. We belong here. Sydney scrambled out from the back of the moving truck crying hysterically. She ran toward the officers, waving her arms. Please do not hurt him. My sister owns this house. She told us we could move in today. We are expecting a baby. You are scaring me. Please put your hands away. I walked briskly up the driveway, holding the deed and my state identification high in the air so the officers could see my hands were full of paperwork, not weapons. Officers, I am the legal owner of this property, I announced, projecting my voice clearly over Sydney's dramatic sobbing. I did not give these individuals permission to be on my property. I certainly did not give that man permission to destroy my front door with a steel crowbar. The second officer approached me cautiously, taking my manila folder. He quickly reviewed my state identification, cross-referencing the name and address with the official deed and the property tax records I had included. He nodded to his partner. The lead officer immediately moved forward, grabbing Donovan's arms and firmly placing him in metal handcuffs. "Lauren, what are you doing?" Sydney screamed. Her face was red with rage, and her fake tears vanished instantly. "Tell them to stop right now. You are going to let them arrest my husband. You are ruining my baby's life. Your husband is attempting to break and enter into a property that is currently under federal escrow," I replied coldly, staring directly into her furious eyes. "He is a criminal, Sydney, and you are trespassing." Just as the officers were patting Donovan down and walking him toward the back of the police cruiser, my parents' luxury SUV screeched to a halt at the curb. They must have been following the moving truck to help them unpack and celebrate their successful hostile takeover. Brenda and Thomas practically tumbled out of the car, sprinting across the lawn toward the police. "Officers, stop this right now! This is a terrible family misunderstanding," Brenda wailed, waving her designer handbag frantically. She turned her absolute venom on me, her eyes filled with pure hatred. "Lauren, you vindictive monster. You are weaponizing the police against a black man in America. Do you know how dangerous this is? You are trying to get him killed over a simple family disagreement about a house key. You are sick." She was actively trying to manipulate the social and racial dynamics to make me look like a racist, unhinged aggressor in front of my neighbors. Several people had already stepped out onto their front porches to watch the commotion. She wanted to shame me into dropping the charges by making a public spectacle. "He is not going to jail for the color of his skin, Mom," I said, raising my voice so the entire street could hear the absolute truth. "He is going to jail because he used a crowbar to try and break into my house, to establish illegal squatter rights and sabotage a multi-million-dollar real estate transaction. He is a fraud." I turned my attention to my father, who was standing frozen on the grass. "And Dad, since we are talking about crimes in front of the police, I visited the precinct downtown this afternoon. I filed a police report for the $150,000 commercial business loan you fraudulently co-signed using my stolen Social Security number to fund his fake company." Thomas stopped breathing. The blood drained completely from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost standing on my front lawn. He looked at the police officers, then back at me, realizing the absolute gravity of the situation. He had assumed I would just absorb the debt to keep the peace. He never imagined I would actually report my own father to the authorities for federal wire fraud. He stumbled backward, clutching his chest as if he had been physically struck. Donovan was shoved into the back of the police cruiser, his head bowed in total defeat. Sydney collapsed onto the manicured lawn, wailing uncontrollably as the reality of her husband's arrest set in. My parents stood there in stunned silence, realizing their perfect, heavily curated world was actively burning to the ground right in front of them. The neighbors were whispering, the police were taking statements, and the facade of the flawless, wealthy suburban family was permanently destroyed. I stood tall on my porch, looking at the broken doorframe, feeling no guilt whatsoever. The lead officer approached me with a clipboard, asking me to provide a formal written statement of the events. I took the pen and carefully documented everything from their uninvited arrival to the exact moment Donovan struck my door. The police informed me that Donovan would be held in county lockup overnight without bail due to the felony nature of the attempted burglary and the property damage. Sydney demanded to ride in the police car with him, but the officers sternly ordered her to step back or face charges for interfering with an arrest. She had to settle for getting into the passenger seat of our parents' SUV, sobbing hysterically into her hands. As the police cruisers slowly pulled away, their red and blue lights fading down the street, my parents refused to look me in the eye. They silently got into their vehicle, the heavy doors shutting with a hollow thud, and drove away, leaving the massive rental truck abandoned in my driveway. I was finally free, and the real estate closing was only 2 days away. The next morning, I arrived at my office feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and absolute clarity. The abandoned moving rental truck had been towed from my driveway before midnight, and Donovan was currently sitting in a county jail cell awaiting his arraignment. I poured my black coffee, booted up my computer, and began finalizing the last few documents for the property closing scheduled for the following day. I knew the silence from my family was temporary. They were not the type of people to accept defeat, especially when their entire financial house of cards was collapsing. Sure enough, just before noon, my office phone rang. It was the security desk in the main lobby. My receptionist had wisely instructed them not to let my parents pass the elevators after their previous stunt. I told the guard to let them up. I wanted to hear exactly what kind of delusional narrative they had constructed overnight. A few minutes later, the heavy glass doors of my suite swung open. Brenda and Thomas walked in, but this time Sydney was with them. Her eyes were puffy and red, her expensive clothes wrinkled. They looked just like a family completely broken by reality. My father did not waste time with pleasantries. He marched straight up to my desk and slammed a thick manila folder down on the polished wood. "Lauren, we are done playing these childish games," he demanded, trying and failing to project his usual authority. His voice was shaking. I spent the entire morning on the phone with a criminal defense attorney. "Do you have any idea how much money they want just for a retainer? We need you to call the district attorney right now and drop the burglary charges against Donovan. Then you are going to call the escrow company and cancel the sale of the house. We need to leverage the equity in that property to secure a bail bond and pay for his legal defense." I stared at him, genuinely fascinated by the sheer audacity of his request. "You want me to cancel a multi-million-dollar corporate real estate transaction and commit perjury by dropping felony charges, so you can use my house to bail out the man who just tried to destroy my front door with a steel crowbar?" I asked, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "Yes," Brenda snapped loudly, taking a step forward. She leaned over my desk, her face twisted into an ugly sneer. "Because he is family, Lauren, and this entire situation is your fault. If you had just been reasonable and let them move in like we asked, none of this would have happened. You forced Donovan into a desperate situation. I was just trying to secure a safe environment for your pregnant sister. He thought he was doing the right thing. He did not know he was breaking the law. He just wanted to surprise you by fixing that sticky lock on your front door." The gaslighting was so blatant, it was almost comical. "Fixing my lock," I repeated, raising an eyebrow. He used a heavy steel tool to splinter a reinforced mahogany door frame, while my sister unloaded cardboard boxes from a stolen rental truck. "Do not insult my intelligence, Mom. And do not pretend this is about a sticky lock. This is about Donovan needing a physical asset to show his investors before the federal government realizes his tech company is a complete sham." Sydney let out a sharp gasp and covered her face with her hands, openly sobbing loudly, right in the middle of my office. Sydney pointed a trembling finger at me. "You are just jealous. You have always been jealous of me because I found a wonderful husband who loves me, and you are going to die completely alone. You are making up lies about his company because you want to see me suffer." I looked at my younger sister, feeling nothing but pity. "I am not making up anything, Sydney." I pulled out a copy of my credit report and threw it across the desk toward my father. "But speaking of lies, let us discuss the $150,000 commercial loan Dad took out using my forged signature and stolen Social Security number. The money that was secretly funneled directly into Donovan's fake business accounts." My father snatched the paper, his face turning an ashen gray. "Lauren, You are overreacting, he stammered, his confident facade shattering instantly. That was just a temporary bridge loan. I was going to pay it back. I just needed your credit profile to secure a better interest rate. It was a family investment. You are completely misunderstanding the financial strategy. I am a licensed commercial real estate appraiser, Dad, I fired back at him fiercely. I know exactly what fraud looks like. I continued, my voice echoing off the glass walls of my office. You did not invest. You stole from me. You jeopardized my entire career and my professional licenses to fund a criminal enterprise. And now you have the nerve to stand in my office and demand I surrender my home to pay for his defense lawyer. You are entirely delusional. The escrow stands, the police report stands, and if you do not leave my office right now, I will add a trespassing charge to your growing list of legal problems. Thomas puffed out his chest, trying to muster one final threat. You listen to me, young lady. If you do not fix this, you are cut off. You will never be welcome at our dinner table again. You will be entirely dead to this family. I stood up from my chair, adjusting my blazer with perfectly calm precision. That is the best offer you have made me in 34 years, I replied. I pressed the button on my intercom. Please send building security up to my office immediately. My parents and my sister need an escort to the street right now. The silence in my office was absolute and deafening. My receptionist peeked around the corner, her eyes wide with deep concern. I nodded and asked her to hold all my calls for the next 2 hours. I walked over to my heavy oak door, turned the deadbolt with a solid click, and closed the motorized window blinds. The adrenaline that had fueled my confrontation was fading, replaced by a cold, analytical dread. I had thrown the $150,000 fraudulent loan in my father's face to force them out, but the reality of that financial grenade was only just beginning to detonate. I sat back down at my desk, the leather of my ergonomic chair squeaking softly in the quiet room. As a commercial real estate appraiser, I understood the catastrophic implications of a defaulted commercial loan. I had only seen the initial alert on my basic credit monitoring app, the terrifying red flag indicating the loan existed and had gone into collections. But I needed the complete picture. I needed forensic-level data to understand exactly how deep this betrayal went and to prepare for the legal war that was approaching. I opened my secure laptop, bypassed the biometric scanner, and logged directly into the Premium Tri-Bureau credit portal. I used for deep background checks on corporate clients. I entered my social security number, answered the rigorous security questions, and paid the fee for a comprehensive real-time financial autopsy. The slow progress bar on the screen seemed to crawl. My hands were shaking slightly, so I clasped them together on my desk, forcing myself to take slow, measured breaths. Finally, the screen flashed green and a 70-page PDF document generated on my computer monitor. I quickly bypassed the summary page and scrolled directly down to the derogatory marks section. There it was, sitting like a malignant tumor on my otherwise flawless financial history. Apex Digital Solutions, LLC. Original loan amount $150,000. Current balance with accrued penalties and default interest $182,416. I felt physically ill. The debt was not just sitting there. It was actively growing, accumulating toxic interest every single day. I clicked on the origination documents attached to the digital file, dissecting the anatomy of my father's fraud. The loan had been structured as an uncollateralized line of credit, which required a pristine personal guarantor to secure. My father had not just forged my signature. He had uploaded my previous year's tax returns, my personal banking statements, and my state-issued appraiser license to prove my liquidity. He had systematically gathered my very most sensitive documents under the guise of needing help with a government contract, and he had handed them all over to a regional bank to secure fast cash for Donovan. But the horror did not stop there. I scrolled down to the payment history matrix. The loan had been taken out 24 months ago. For the first 12 months, minimum payments had been made on time. Donovan was using borrowed money to pay the interest on the borrowed money, the classic hallmark of a Ponzi scheme. But exactly 12 months ago, the payments stopped completely. The account went 30 days past due, then 60, then 90, before finally being charged off and sold to an aggressive commercial collection agency. For an entire year, my father and Donovan knew this massive default was destroying my credit profile, and they said absolutely nothing. They sat across from me at parties, smiling and drinking wine, secretly allowing my financial identity to burn down. The cascading effects were already visible in the report. Because my credit score had plummeted by 250 points, automated algorithms at my other financial institutions triggered risk mitigation protocols. I saw two separate alerts indicating that my own legitimate business lines of credit had their limits slashed by 50%. A premium travel credit card I used for client dinners had been abruptly canceled just that morning due to sudden high-risk status. The massive default was acting like a virus infecting every healthy financial account I possessed. If I did not get a federal fraud hold placed on this specific collection account immediately, my entire appraisal firm could face insolvency within weeks. I printed the 70-page document. The heavy commercial printer in the corner of my office whirred to life, spitting out the physical evidence of my family's treachery. I grabbed a red pen and began circling every fraudulent data point, forged date, and unauthorized document upload. This was no longer just a defensive maneuver to protect the sale of my house. This was a necessary offensive strike to save my very own livelihood. I organized the pages into a binder, separating the fraud from the timeline. My father thought he was dealing with the obedient, quiet daughter he had marginalized for 34 years. He completely forgot he was dealing with a woman who analyzed complex financial fraud for a living. I picked up my heavy office phone and dialed the direct extension for the lead investigator at the Regional Bank Fraud Division. It was time to strike back today. The phone rang twice before a stern voice answered on the other end. Fraud Division Investigator Miller speaking. I introduced myself and referenced the case number I had initiated earlier. I informed him that I was a licensed commercial real estate appraiser and that I had pulled my own comprehensive tri-bureau credit report. I did not hold back. I explained that I was looking at 70 pages of undeniable proof that his institution had funded a fraudulent, uncollateralized line of credit using stolen credentials. Miller tried to use his standard customer service de-escalation tactics. "Ma'am, I understand you are upset, but our underwriting department follows strict verification protocols. We do not just hand out six-figure commercial loans without verifying the primary guarantor." "That is exactly my point, Miller." I snapped back, my voice sharp and unwavering. "Your underwriting department completely failed. You approved a $150,000 line of credit for an entity called Apex Digital Solutions. The primary guarantor is listed as me. I am sitting in my office holding the origination documents your bank uploaded to the credit bureaus. I want you to open my file right now and look at the signature on the guarantor agreement." I heard the rapid clacking of a keyboard through the receiver. A heavy silence stretched for several seconds as Miller pulled up the digital paperwork. "Do you see the electronic signature?" I asked. "Yes, I have it right here," he replied, his tone slightly less dismissive. Now I continued. "Look at the state-issued appraiser license that was uploaded to verify my identity. Look at the physical signature on that license. They do not match. The electronic signature on your loan document is a crude digital stamp. Furthermore, look at the IP address used to execute that document." More keyboard clacking echoed through the phone. "The IP address originates from a residential internet service provider in downtown Chicago," Miller stated. "Exactly," I said. "That IP address belongs to a luxury condominium owned by Thomas and Brenda, my parents. My personal residence and my business office are located in the suburbs, which is clearly stated on my tax returns. Your bank allowed a third party to electronically sign a commercial loan from a residential IP address that does not match any of my verified locations, using an unverified digital stamp to fund a shell company. If you do not place an immediate federal fraud freeze on this account, my next phone call will be to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to report your institution for gross negligence and complicity in wire fraud." The shift in Miller's demeanor was instantaneous. The bored bureaucrat vanished, replaced by a man who realized his bank was facing massive federal liability. "Please hold the line, Ms. Lauren," I am escalating this to our senior compliance director immediately. I waited on hold for 5 agonizing minutes, the generic elevator music mocking the severity of the situation. When the line clicked back open, Miller was joined by a woman who introduced herself as Director Vance. She did not bother with pleasantries. Ms. Lauren Director Vance began, her voice crisp and professional. We are reviewing the origination packet for Apex Digital Solutions. You are alleging that the primary borrower, Donovan, colluded with an unauthorized third party, Thomas, to secure this credit line. I am not alleging anything, Director Vance. I am stating a forensic fact. 2 years ago, my father Thomas asked me to provide my updated financial documents and my social security number to help him with a background check for a government contract. He used that exact packet of information to secure this loan. He stole my social security number, forged my signature, and handed the capital over to his son-in-law. They have been running a fraudulent operation using my pristine credit profile as a human shield. Director Vance let out a slow exhale. Ms. Lauren, if what you are saying is true, this goes far beyond simple identity theft. Apex Digital Solutions has been flagged by our internal risk management system for suspicious wire transfers. The funds from this credit line were immediately dispersed into multiple offshore cryptocurrency exchanges. We have been trying to track the capital for months, but the corporate veil of Apex made it difficult. They were using my stolen identity to fund a crypto laundering scheme. I realized aloud the true scale of Donovan's criminality finally clicking into place. My father did not just co-sign a bad loan. He financed a federal money laundering operation. Director Vance confirmed my suspicion. If the guarantor documents were forged, then the entire credit line was obtained under false pretenses across state lines. That constitutes federal wire fraud. We are locking down the account immediately. We are wiping the derogatory marks from your credit profile pending the final police investigation, and we are forwarding this entire file to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I felt a massive weight lift off my chest. The destructive collection account was going to be scrubbed. My business lines of credit would be restored, but the relief was instantly overshadowed by a deep burning anger. My father had looked me in the eye at that restaurant, demanding I surrender my house to him, knowing full well he had already sold my financial soul to a regional bank. He had sacrificed my entire future to buy Donovan a few more months of pretending to be a tech mogul. I thanked Director Vance and ended the call. The silence returned to my office, but it no longer felt suffocating. It felt like the calm before an absolute storm. I had the bank on my side. I had the undeniable paper trail proving my father stole my social security number. I had the IP addresses, the forged signatures, and the crypto transfer logs. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a fresh legal pad. I began outlining my next moves with the ruthless precision of a corporate liquidator. My family had spent my entire life treating me like an emotionless ATM, a convenient backup plan they could discard whenever they pleased. They thought my lack of a husband and children made me weak and vulnerable to their manipulation. They were about to learn that a financially independent woman with nothing to lose and a pristine legal team is the most dangerous enemy they could ever create. I picked up my phone to call my lawyer. I grabbed the thick binder off my desk, shoved it into my leather briefcase, and rushed out of my office. I bypassed my receptionist with a quick nod and took the express elevator down to the parking garage. The drive to Arthur's high-rise office building took less than 10 minutes. My mind was operating with total clarity. The fear that had initially paralyzed me when I saw my ruined credit score was completely gone, replaced by a cold, calculating determination. My family had treated me like collateral damage for my entire life. They assumed I would just absorb this massive financial blow to protect their fabricated social image. I navigated through the busy downtown traffic, parked my car in the underground structure, and took the private elevator directly up to the top floor of the law firm. Arthur's paralegal was waiting for me and immediately escorted me into his expansive corner office overlooking Lake Michigan. Arthur was already standing by his mahogany conference table, his sleeves rolled up ready for war. I unlatched my briefcase and pulled out the heavy binder, sliding it across the polished wood. I have highlighted every single fraudulent data point, I told him, pointing to the red ink covering the documents. They used my tax returns and my commercial appraiser license to bypass the underwriting protocols. The bank confirmed the funds were instantly dispersed into offshore cryptocurrency exchanges controlled by Donovan. Arthur began flipping through the pages, his eyes scanning the numbers with predatory speed. Your father crossed a line he cannot uncross, Arthur stated firmly. By using the internet to transmit forged documents to a federally insured bank across state lines, he committed multiple counts of federal wire fraud. And because Donovan used the stolen capital to fund an untraceable crypto scheme, we are looking at severe money laundering charges. This is no longer a simple family dispute over a suburban house. We need to formally update your identity theft police reports immediately. Arthur continued, walking over to his desk to grab a stack of legal affidavits. You filed a preliminary report with the local precinct when we thought this was just a bad loan. But now that we have forensic proof of the crypto transfers and the IP address logs, we are filing a comprehensive package with the Federal Trade Commission, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Cybercrimes Division, and the State Attorney General. We are going to build an impenetrable wall of evidence around you, so that when the federal indictments drop, your name is completely isolated from their criminal enterprise. I sat down in one of the plush leather chairs, taking a deep breath. Do it, I said without a second of hesitation. Draft whatever you need to draft. I will sign every single affidavit. They declared war on my livelihood, and I am going to finish it. Arthur and his team of paralegals worked at lightning speed. Within 2 hours, they had generated a mountain of official legal declarations. I sat at the conference table reading through every single page meticulously before signing my name. I formally attested under penalty of perjury that I had never authorized the creation of Apex Digital Solutions. I swore that I had never signed the guarantor agreement and that my father had obtained my personal identifying information under false pretenses. Every signature felt like I was severing a heavy toxic chain that had held me down for 34 years. When the paperwork was complete, Arthur organized the documents into 3 separate heavy-duty folders. We are walking these over to the Financial Crimes Division at the Chicago Police Department headquarters. Right now, he said, grabbing his suit jacket. We are handing this directly to the lead detective to attach to your original case file. We walked the 3 blocks to the massive police headquarters building in silence. The afternoon sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the concrete sidewalks. Inside the precinct, Arthur bypassed the front desk entirely and used his credentials to get us straight up to the Financial Crimes Unit. We sat down with the lead detective, a hardened veteran who looked at the 70-page binder with absolute astonishment. You are telling me your own father orchestrated a $150,000 identity theft scheme to fund his son-in-law's crypto scam? The detective asked, shaking his head. Yes, I replied steadily. And I have the bank on record confirming the IP address traces back to his living room. The detective took the binder, officially logging it into evidence. He assured me the case was being immediately escalated to the federal task force. I walked out of that police station feeling completely and absolutely lighter than air. Tomorrow was the final closing day for my house. My family had tried to destroy me, but I was about to walk away with millions. They were going to face the brutal reality of federal prison, and I would never ever have to look at their toxic, manipulative faces ever again. I drove back to my temporary luxury apartment downtown, a high-security building I had leased while I planned my permanent relocation. The sun was setting over the Chicago skyline, casting dramatic shadows. I ordered takeout, poured a glass of expensive red wine, and sat on my velvet sofa. I was exhausted, but it was a victorious exhaustion. My legal team was prepared for the closing the next morning. The federal authorities were actively building an airtight case against my father and Donovan. For the first time, I felt entirely safe. I took a sip of my wine and opened my laptop to review the final settlement statement. Everything was perfectly in order. The corporate buyers were ready to wire the funds at exactly 9 in the morning. I closed the laptop, letting out a sigh. Then my cell phone buzzed sharply on the glass coffee table. It was a harsh rhythm that I immediately recognized. It was the emergency push notification from the high-definition security system installed at my vacant suburban house. I frowned, setting my wine glass down. I had paid a contractor to temporarily board up the front door frame after Donovan's crowbar attack. The police had increased patrols, and the property was supposed to be secure until the final walkthrough. I picked up my phone expecting a stray cat. Instead, the bright red banner across my screen read, "Multiple motion sensors triggered at front driveway and rear patio." My heart skipped a beat. I quickly unlocked my phone and tapped the notification, pulling up the live video feed. The night vision cameras illuminated my large suburban driveway in stark black and white. For a second, I could not comprehend what I was seeing. A massive 26-foot U-Haul moving truck was aggressively backing over the curb, crushing my meticulously landscaped front bushes as it maneuvered into the driveway. My mind raced. Donovan was currently sitting in a holding cell at the county jail, denied bail due to his flight risk and pending federal wire fraud charges. He could not possibly be driving that truck. The air brakes hissed loudly on the live audio feed, and the heavy truck lurched to a halt. The driver's side door swung open, and a man stepped out into the crisp night air. It was not Donovan, it was my father, Thomas. I stared at the screen in absolute disbelief. My father, a man who prided himself on his impeccable country club image and soft hands, was wearing a dark hooded sweatshirt and gripping a heavy steel bolt cutter. A second later, the passenger door opened, and my mother, Brenda, hopped down onto the concrete. She was completely frantic, looking nervously up and down the quiet street to see if any neighbors were watching. Finally, the rear roll-up door of the massive moving truck flew open with a loud metallic crash. Sydney climbed out of the back, followed by three heavily tattooed men who looked like day laborers hired straight out of a sketchy cash parking lot. Because Donovan's initial violent attempt to establish squatter rights had failed so spectacularly, they assumed I would let my guard down on the final night before closing. They knew that if the property successfully transferred to the corporate developers in the morning, their last chance at securing a physical asset to leverage for Donovan's legal defense would vanish forever. So in an act of absolute unhinged desperation, my wealthy, status-obsessed parents had rented their own moving truck, hired muscle under the table, and decided to stage a midnight home invasion to force Sydney into the house. I watched the live feed, completely paralyzed by the sheer criminality playing out on my screen. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a highly coordinated illegal occupation attempt in Illinois. If an individual manages to move their physical belongings into a property, changes the locks, and establishes a physical presence overnight, local police often refuse to intervene, citing it as a civil domestic dispute. The police will tell the legal homeowner that they must file a formal eviction notice through the courts, a process that can take up to 6 grueling months. My parents knew exactly what they were doing. They were trying to create a legal nightmare that would completely sabotage my multi-million-dollar corporate sale at the 11th hour. On the video feed, Thomas directed the three hired men toward the front porch. They completely ignored the boarded-up front door that Donovan had destroyed. Instead, my father led them around the side of the house toward the large custom glass patio doors opening into the main living room. Brenda was aggressively clapping her hands, urging the men to move faster. Sydney was dragging a heavy mattress out of the back of the truck, her face set in a look of grim, entitled determination. They were going to shatter my expensive patio glass, move a bed into the living room, and refuse to leave when the corporate buyers arrived for the morning walkthrough. I did not panic. I did not scream. The woman who would have cried over her family's betrayal died the moment I saw that defaulted $150,000 loan on my credit report. I was a completely different person now. I was a woman holding the deed, backed by a ruthless corporate litigation attorney and fully prepared to send her entire family to prison. I quickly swiped out of the live camera application and opened my contact list. I bypassed the local police precinct. The local cops might hesitate when Brenda started crying and claiming it was a family misunderstanding over a lease. I needed overwhelming, undeniable authority to crush their midnight invasion before a single piece of furniture crossed my threshold. I tapped the private cell phone number for Arthur, my attorney. He answered immediately on the first ring, completely alert and ready. We had exactly 8 hours left to stop them. "Arthur," I said, my voice steady, despite adrenaline surging through my veins. My parents arrived at my suburban property with a massive moving truck. Donovan is in holding, but my own father hired 3 unidentified men. They are walking straight toward my patio doors with bolt cutters and a mattress. They are trying to establish physical squatter rights before the heat. Do not call local dispatch, he instructed sharply. If your mother starts crying and waving a forged lease, a rookie patrol officer might get confused and call it a civil matter. I am calling the Financial Crimes Division Task Force leader we met with this afternoon. Your property is now part of an active federal wire fraud investigation. Attempting to physically occupy it is direct interference with federal evidence. Stay inside your apartment, Lauren. It is not safe for you to be there with hired muscle. I am the legal homeowner. Arthur, I replied, grabbing my keys. I am not letting my parents gaslight another police officer while destroying my property. I am driving over there right now. I hung up, sprinted to the garage, jumped into my car, and sped toward the suburbs. My phone remained open on the passenger seat, broadcasting the live feed from my security cameras. The laborers were struggling to carry a heavy mattress across the dark lawn. Thomas was aggressively pointing his bolt cutters at the reinforced lock on the patio doors, instructing the men on how to leverage the track. Brenda was frantically pacing around holding a heavy folder filled with papers. I knew exactly what was in that folder. It was another batch of forged, backdated lease agreements she planned to shove into the face of any officer to claim tenant rights. I pushed the accelerator to the floor, weaving through the sparse midnight traffic. On the feed, Thomas raised the steel bolt cutters and slammed them violently against the sliding glass door handle. The metal cracked, but the glass held firm. He cursed loudly, ordering a tattooed laborer to help pry the door open. Once that dirty mattress was inside, the long legal nightmare would begin. But Arthur delivered perfectly on his promise. Just as the laborer wedged a crowbar into the glass track, the dark street erupted in a blinding flash of tactical lights. 3 unmarked black vehicles and 2 heavily armed police cruisers swarmed the driveway, boxing in the rental truck. Sirens blared loudly for a second before being cut off, replaced by the commanding voice of an officer over a bullhorn. Drop the tools and step away from the building. Put your hands in the air immediately. The 3 hired men looked at the tactical vests and dropped their tools. They threw their hands up and dropped to their knees, wanting nothing to do with a federal raid. But my father, blinded by his entitlement, refused to surrender. Thomas turned around wildly, waving the heavy bolt cutters. "You have no jurisdiction here," he screamed, his face distorted by rage. "This is a private residence. My daughter is a legal tenant. We are simply moving her belongings into her rightful home. You are legally trespassing. Leave immediately." "Put the weapon down now," a seasoned detective shouted, aiming his firearm directly at my father. Brenda shrieked, throwing herself in front of Thomas. She waved the folder frantically at the advancing officers. "Stop. You are making a terrible mistake. We have a binding contract. My pregnant daughter is right here. She is the victim of an illegal eviction. You cannot arrest us. We are wealthy, law-abiding citizens." I pulled my car onto the street as the officers moved in. I parked across the neighbor's driveway and stepped into the chaotic scene. The tactical floodlights illuminated my parents perfectly. They looked utterly pathetic, clutching forged documents while completely surrounded by law enforcement. "They do not have a lease," I announced, walking past the vehicles and approaching the detective I met earlier. I handed him the certified deed and my identification. "They are attempting an illegal midnight occupation to sabotage a corporate real estate transaction. That man is Thomas, the individual named in the federal wire fraud report we filed 5 hours ago." The detective glanced at my documents, nodded in recognition, and turned his attention back to my parents. The look of disgust on his face was palpable. "Thomas, you are under arrest for attempted burglary, trespassing, and destruction of property," the detective stated coldly. Officers stepped forward, grabbing my father's arms and wrestling the bolt cutters from his grip. "This is an absolute outrage," Thomas bellowed as the handcuffs clicked tightly around his wrists. "I will personally sue this entire department. I know the city mayor. You are also being detained as a primary suspect in a multi-million-dollar federal wire fraud investigation," the detective added, ignoring his threats. "The Cybercrimes Division is currently executing a search warrant at your downtown condominium." The fight drained completely out of Thomas instantly. His knees buckled entirely, and the arresting officers had to physically hold him upright to prevent him from collapsing onto the grass. The illusion of his untouchable status evaporated into the cold midnight air. Sydney began to wail, a horrific piercing sound echoing through the neighborhood. She fell to her knees beside the abandoned mattress, clutching her stomach. "Lauren, how could you ever do this to your own family?" Brenda dropped the folder of forged documents. The papers scattered across the manicured lawn, blowing away into the darkness. She stared at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of absolute terror and disbelief. She finally realized that the obedient daughter she marginalized for 34 years was the person who dismantled her existence. "Take them all away," the detective ordered. The officers dragged my father toward the back of an unmarked vehicle. The midnight home invasion was over, and the path to final closing was completely clear. The detective grabbed Brenda by the wrists, firmly detaching her from his vest. "Ma'am," he stated coldly, "your husband did not co-sign a loan. He forged digital signatures and utilized a stolen commercial appraiser license to defraud a federally insured institution. Furthermore, the Cybercrimes Division has already traced the stolen capital. Your brilliant son-in-law did not build a software platform. He funneled $150,000 into untraceable offshore cryptocurrency accounts to hide it from the federal government. That is money laundering, and your husband facilitated the entire operation." Brenda gasped, stumbling backward as if she had been physically struck. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a frantic, desperate pleading that I had never seen before. "Lauren, please," she begged, her voice cracking into a pathetic sob. "Tell them this is a mistake. Tell them you gave your father permission to use your information. We are your parents. We raised you. We paid for your college. You cannot send your own father to a federal penitentiary. You owe us. You have to drop these charges right now and let Sydney move into the house. It is the only way to protect the family assets from the federal seizure." I stood on the damp grass, feeling absolutely nothing for the woman crying in front of me. "I do not owe you a single thing," I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. "You allowed my father to steal my identity, ruin my credit, and jeopardize my entire professional license just so Donovan could play pretend as a tech CEO. You orchestrated a midnight break-in to sabotage a multi-million-dollar corporate sale because you view my assets as your personal piggy bank. I am not withdrawing a single charge. You and Thomas are going to face the full weight of the federal justice system, and I will gladly testify against both of you in open court." The finality in my voice seemed to break whatever fragile thread of sanity Brenda was holding on to. She began to hyperventilate, collapsing onto the driveway next to the scattered forged lease agreements. Two female officers immediately moved in, pulling Brenda up by her arms and informing her that she was being detained for questioning regarding the cybercrimes warrant executed at her condominium. As the handcuffs clicked around my mother's wrists, the focus shifted entirely to my sister. Sydney was still kneeling on the grass beside the abandoned dirty mattress. When she saw our mother being placed into a police cruiser, her weeping turned into a completely unhinged rage. She scrambled to her feet, her face red and contorted with fury. She ignored the heavily armed police officers entirely and charged directly toward me. "This is all your fault!" Sydney screamed violently, pointing her finger at my face. "You are a selfish, miserable woman. Donovan was going to make millions. He was going to buy us a mansion. You ruined everything because you are jealous of my marriage. You are jealous that I am pregnant and you are entirely alone." A patrol officer quickly stepped between us, holding his hand up to block her path, but Sydney was completely inconsolable. She tried to push past the officer, her sense of entitlement completely blinding her to the legal reality of the situation. "Give me the keys to the house right now, Lauren," she demanded, stomping her foot on the pavement like a toddler throwing a tantrum. "I am pregnant. I have nowhere to go." The federal agents locked the doors to our apartment because of Donovan's arrest. "My baby needs a home. You have to surrender the property to me immediately." The absolute delusion of her demand left the surrounding police officers staring in sheer bewilderment. "Ma'am," the detective intervened, stepping in front of Sydney. "Your husband is currently in federal holding. Your parents are under arrest for attempted burglary and wire fraud. You are standing on private property that does not belong to you, screaming at the legal owner. You need to step back to the sidewalk immediately, or you will be joining your mother in the back of a squad car for disturbing the peace and criminal trespassing." Sydney did not step back. Instead, she let out an ear-piercing shriek and threw herself onto the driveway, thrashing wildly against the concrete. She kicked her legs, screaming that she was a victim, screaming that the police were abusing a pregnant woman, screaming that I was an evil monster who wanted her baby to be homeless. It was a complete psychological breakdown, a lifetime of being shielded from consequences finally crashing down on her all at once. The officers handled the situation with strict professionalism. They called for a medical transport unit. Within 10 minutes, an ambulance arrived with flashing lights illuminating the chaotic scene. Paramedics safely secured my thrashing, screaming sister onto a stretcher, assessing her vitals, while police officers documented her aggressive behavior. They loaded Sydney into the back of the ambulance to transport her to the hospital for a mandatory psychiatric evaluation. She continued to scream my name, hurling vicious insults, until the heavy doors slammed shut, cutting off the noise entirely. I stood silently in the driveway, watching the convoy of emergency vehicles prepare to leave. The 3 hired laborers had been processed and released with strict trespassing citations, sprinting away into the night as fast as they could. The massive rental truck was hitched to a police tow rig, officially impounded as evidence in the attempted burglary. I watched as the cruiser carrying my parents pulled away from the curb, turning the corner, and disappearing into the darkness. The ambulance carrying my sister followed closely behind. The street slowly returned to its quiet suburban stillness. I walked up to the front porch, shining my phone flashlight on the heavy wooden boards covering the destroyed door frame. The temporary barricade was completely untouched. My father and his hired muscle had never even made it past the driveway. I walked around the perimeter of the house, ensuring the glass patio doors were fully secure. Everything was perfectly intact. The property was safe. I walked back to my car, got into the driver's seat, and started the engine. I did not feel a single drop of guilt or remorse. I only felt an overwhelming sense of liberation. I shifted the car into gear and drove back toward my luxury apartment downtown, ready to face the sunrise and finalize the multi-million-dollar transaction that would permanently sever me from my toxic past. The morning sun breached the horizon, filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my downtown luxury apartment. I had only slept for 3 hours, but my mind was incredibly sharp. Today was closing day. The corporate buyers were scheduled to wire the multi-million-dollar funds by 9 o'clock. I brewed a strong cup of coffee and sat at my kitchen island, pulling my phone off the wireless charger. I fully expected to see a confirmation email from my real estate broker. Instead, my lock screen was completely paralyzed by a barrage of notifications. There were 47 missed calls, 92 unread text messages, and a continuous stream of social media alerts. I unlocked the screen, my brow furrowing in confusion. The text messages were not from my legal team or the buyers. They were from my extended family. Aunts, uncles, second cousins, and even distant family friends I had not spoken to in a decade were flooding my inbox with absolute vitriol. The messages were completely unhinged. They called me a sociopath, a greedy corporate monster, and a traitor. One text from my Aunt Susan simply read, "I hope you burn in hell for what you did to your own flesh and blood." I opened my Facebook application to find the source of the sudden outrage. It was immediately clear. My mother Brenda had been released from police custody on her own recognizance at 4 in the morning. Because she was not the primary guarantor on the forged loan documents, the detectives had released her pending further federal investigation, while my father remained locked in a holding cell. Brenda had immediately used her freedom to launch a scorched earth public relations campaign. Sitting in the waiting room of the police precinct, she had drafted a massive, defamatory manifesto and posted it publicly to her Facebook page, tagging every single member of our extended family, her local church groups, and multiple neighborhood community boards. I read the lengthy post, my coffee growing cold in my hand. Brenda had completely rewritten reality to paint herself as a religious martyr and me as a wealthy, vindictive villain. To all our friends and family. The post began, accompanied by a dramatically edited, tearful selfie of Brenda standing outside the police station. It is with a completely shattered heart that I must share a horrific family tragedy. Last night, my eldest daughter, Lauren, completely lost her mind to corporate greed. Because she is jealous of her sister Sydney's beautiful marriage and impending pregnancy, Lauren orchestrated a violent illegal eviction. She forced a heavily armed SWAT team to raid our family home in the middle of the night just to throw a pregnant woman out onto the cold street. When her father Thomas heroically tried to intervene to protect his unborn grandchild, Lauren fabricated a lie about a clerical error on a business loan. She had her own father arrested and thrown into a concrete cell, just so she could steal the family house and sell it to greedy developers. Please pray for us. Lauren is a deeply disturbed, sick individual who cares only about money. The post already had hundreds of comments and shares. The community outrage was boiling over. Extended family members who had never once bothered to check on my well-being were now publicly demanding my head. My uncle Richard, a man who had famously borrowed $10,000 from my father and never paid it back, posted a lengthy comment declaring that I was officially dead to the entire bloodline. He tagged several prominent local real estate brokers in the comment, actively attempting to sabotage my professional network by claiming I was under investigation for elder abuse. Other cousins chimed in, leaving disgusted emojis and threatening to show up at my office to protest my behavior. My phone began to buzz in my hand. It was an incoming call from Aunt Susan. I hit the ignore button, letting it go straight to voicemail. A minute later, a notification popped up indicating she had left a 3-minute audio message. I tapped play, holding the phone away from my ear as her shrill voice echoed through my kitchen. "Lauren Elizabeth, how dare you?" she screamed into the receiver. "Your mother is having a complete nervous breakdown in my living room. Sydney is sedated in a hospital bed because of the trauma you inflicted on her unborn child. You are a disgusting, greedy spinster. We are all calling your appraisal firm today to file formal complaints. We will destroy your career until you drop these fake charges and let your family move into that house." The message ended with a violent click. The relentless harassment was designed to break me, to shame me into withdrawing the federal charges and stopping the corporate sale. Brenda knew that public reputation was the absolute currency of our extended family. She assumed that if she mobilized the entire clan against me, the social pressure would crush my resolve. She thought I would desperately crave their validation and surrender my property to buy back their fake love. She genuinely believed that the threat of being uninvited to Thanksgiving dinners and family reunions would force me to drop the federal wire fraud and money laundering charges against her husband and her son-in-law. She was completely wrong. I did not feel shame. I felt an icy, calculated thrill. Brenda had just handed me the final nail for her own legal coffin. I set my coffee mug down and immediately took high-resolution screenshots of the entire Facebook post. I captured every single comment, every threatening reply, and every share. I opened my voicemail application and saved the hysterical, screaming messages left by my aunts and uncles. In her desperate attempt to control the family narrative, Brenda had completely forgotten that she was a named suspect in an active federal wire fraud investigation. By publicly attacking me, accusing me of fabricating crimes and encouraging third parties to harass my business, she had crossed a massive legal boundary. I opened a new email draft and attached every single screenshot and audio file. I addressed it directly to Arthur, my corporate litigation attorney, and copied the lead detective from the Financial Crimes Task Force. The subject line was simple: witness intimidation, defamation, and violation of release conditions. I hit send. Arthur replied within 2 minutes. The email contained only 2 sentences. "Do not engage with any of them under any circumstances. I am forwarding this comprehensive packet to the federal prosecutor right now to have your mother's bail conditions immediately revoked for blatant witness tampering and cyber harassment." A small, victorious smile crept across my face. Brenda thought she was winning a popularity contest on social media, completely oblivious to the fact that she had just committed a federal felony by trying to intimidate a key witness. I closed my laptop, walked into my bathroom, and turned on the shower. The hot water washed away the lingering exhaustion of the midnight raid. I dressed in my sharpest, most expensive tailored suit, applied a flawless layer of makeup, and slipped on my designer heels. My phone continued to vibrate relentlessly on the kitchen counter, lighting up with hateful text messages from people who meant absolutely nothing to me. I picked up the device, toggled the setting to Do Not Disturb, and dropped it into my leather briefcase. I had wasted 34 years trying to please a family that viewed me as an expendable asset. I was not going to waste a single second of my closing day worrying about their unhinged social media drama. I grabbed my car keys and walked out the door, ready to sign the final paperwork and collect my millions. I pulled my luxury sedan into the reserved parking space at the downtown title agency. The morning air was crisp, and the towering glass facade of the building reflected the bright city sun. The glass doors parted automatically as I walked into the expansive marble-floored lobby. The receptionist immediately recognized me and escorted me into the executive boardroom. Arthur was already there, sharply dressed in a tailored navy suit, flanked by the corporate developers and their extensive legal team. The energy in the room was entirely professional and electric, completely devoid of the chaotic, desperate toxicity that defined my family. We spent 45 minutes reviewing the massive stack of final settlement statements. I signed my name precisely 32 times, each signature severing another invisible chain to my past. At exactly 9:17 in the morning, the escrow officer looked up from her laptop and confirmed the wire transfer had cleared the Federal Reserve. Millions of dollars landed seamlessly into my secure, heavily fortified private wealth management account. The suburban house was officially gone. I was completely, undeniably free. I shook hands with the corporate developers, thanking them for a smooth and efficient transaction. I walked out of the title agency with Arthur, but we were not going to a celebratory brunch. We walked 2 blocks back to his towering law firm. When we entered his corner office, the massive mahogany conference table was entirely covered in financial printouts, server logs, bank statements, and printed screenshots. A man in a crisp gray suit was meticulously pinning a complex, sprawling flowchart to a large corkboard set up by the window. Lauren, Arthur said, tossing his leather briefcase onto the sofa. I want you to meet David. He is the lead forensic accountant for our firm, and he just spent the last 12 hours dissecting Donovan's supposed tech empire. David offered a curt, respectful nod and immediately launched into his presentation. He was a man who lived for data, and he did not waste time with unnecessary pleasantries. Miss Lauren, David began pointing a laser pointer at a printed web page pinned to the center of the board. This is the official homepage for Apex Digital Solutions. On the surface, it looks like a perfectly legitimate enterprise software platform. It boasts a full board of directors, detailed case studies, and a roster of impressive corporate clients. However, every single pixel of this website is a complete and utter fabrication. The professional headshots of the board members are AI-generated images purchased from a stock catalog. The corporate headquarters address listed in their footer is a UPS store mailbox located in a decaying strip mall. The enterprise clients they claim to service do not exist in any registered corporate database. I stepped closer to the corkboard, my eyes scanning the intricate web of red lines connecting various bank accounts to shell corporations. So Donovan used a fake website and my stolen social security number to convince a regional bank he was a legitimate tech founder, I asked, tracing a heavy red line from the bank logo to an offshore account. That was just the entry point, David replied, his tone growing incredibly grim. Securing that $150,000 line of credit was merely the seed capital for a much darker, highly organized operation. Donovan is not a software developer. He is a mid-level cryptocurrency launderer. David tapped a thick stack of transaction logs sitting on the table. Once your father forged the guarantor documents and the bank released the funds, Donovan immediately wired the entire sum into an offshore unregulated crypto exchange. But he did not just buy digital currency. He used specialized decentralized software known as a coin mixer. It is designed to rapidly scramble digital currency across thousands of anonymous wallets, making it virtually impossible for traditional banking regulators to trace the original source of the funds. Arthur stepped up beside me, crossing his arms over his chest. Donovan was running a laundering service for illegal sports betting rings, Arthur explained smoothly. He used the pristine credit profile of a licensed commercial real estate appraiser to open legitimate business checking accounts. He would accept dirty fiat currency from illegal gambling operations, wash it through his complex crypto mixers, and return it to the criminals as clean corporate dividends from Apex Digital Solutions. I was charging a 20% premium for the illegal service. Your father did not just help his son-in-law get a risky business loan. Thomas willingly provided the fraudulent foundation for a federal money laundering syndicate. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal hit me like a physical blow. My parents had spent their entire lives lecturing me about propriety, social standing, and upholding the family reputation. They had judged my every move, demanding absolute perfection while secretly operating as complicit accessories to a massive federal financial crime. They had risked my commercial appraiser license, my hard-earned business reputation, and my personal freedom just to keep up appearances and fund Donovan's lavish criminal lifestyle. They thought my spotless financial record was their personal playground. The FBI Cybercrimes Division is executing a raid on that UPS store mailbox right now. David continued, pulling up a live news alert on his secure tablet. They are also actively seizing the physical servers Donovan used to run the coin mixers from a rented warehouse. Thanks to the forensic packet we submitted yesterday, the federal prosecutors have completely isolated your identity from the fraudulent corporate shell. You are officially designated as the primary victim of identity theft. Your credit file is being completely expunged by the bureaus as we speak. And your mother just handed the federal prosecutor the final piece of leverage they needed, Arthur added. He picked up the printed screenshots of Brenda's unhinged Facebook manifesto that I had emailed him earlier. The United States Attorney reviewed her public statements claiming you fabricated the loan documents because she publicly attempted to intimidate a federal witness and incite coordinated harassment against your legitimate business. The federal judge just signed an emergency order revoking her release status. Federal marshals are en route to your Aunt Susan's house right now to take Brenda back into custody for flagrantly violating her bail conditions. I looked at the massive web of lies pinned to the corkboard. The multi-million-dollar wire transfer sitting in my secure account was no longer just the proceeds of a real estate sale. It was my absolute armor. My family had built an entire existence on a fragile foundation of stolen money, forged documents, and toxic manipulation. Now the federal government was systematically tearing that foundation apart brick by brick. I took a deep breath, feeling a rush of pure, unadulterated power coursing through my veins. I turned to Arthur and David, a cold, calculated smile forming on my lips. "Let them burn," I said quietly, my voice devoid of any hesitation. "I want you to draft a comprehensive civil lawsuit immediately. They tried to destroy my livelihood, so I am going to take everything they have left. Go after my parents, luxury condominium freeze their retirement portfolios, and garnish whatever clean assets they possess to cover my legal fees and the damages to my professional reputation. I am going to bankrupt them before the federal government even gets the chance to send them to prison." Arthur nodded, a sharp glint of predatory approval in his eyes. He leaned over the massive conference table and pulled a fresh legal pad from his leather briefcase. "I will have the civil litigation team begin drafting the asset freeze petitions immediately," Arthur confirmed, his pen flying rapidly across the page. "But before we file the civil suit to claim their remaining assets, David has one more layer of this financial nightmare to show you. It is the real reason the federal authorities moved so aggressively on a seemingly minor corporate fraud case." David tapped his tablet and the large monitor on the wall hummed to life. The screen displayed a complex, intricate web of tax filings, shell company registrations, and crypto wallet hashes. "The Federal Bureau of Investigation Cybercrimes Unit is not the only agency dissecting your brother-in-law," David explained, stepping back to let me view the massive screen. "The Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division has been quietly building a massive parallel case against Donovan for the past 18 months. I stared at the intricate diagrams, my mind struggling to process the sheer scale of the criminality. "The IRS?" I asked, crossing my arms in front of my chest. I assumed Donovan was just dodging standard income taxes because he had no actual legitimate corporate revenue. "It goes far deeper than simple tax evasion," David said, adjusting his glasses and pulling up a new slide. "When Donovan ran the laundered sports betting money through those anonymous crypto mixers, He had to figure out a way to integrate that clean capital into his personal bank accounts without triggering suspicious activity reports. So he used Apex Digital Solutions, the fake shell company built on your stolen identity, to issue himself highly inflated fraudulent W-2 forms. How was paying himself a massive corporate salary using the laundered crypto funds? How was paying income tax on stolen money to make it look legitimate? I asked, the sheer audacity of the scheme completely blowing my mind. Exactly, Arthur interjected, leaning against the edge of the conference table. But criminals always get greedy. Donovan did not just pay himself a clean salary. He started using the offshore crypto wallets to directly purchase luxury assets for Sydney, completely bypassing the United States tax system entirely. He bought her imported vehicles, leased their high-end luxury apartment, and funded their extravagant vacations using direct crypto transfers that were never reported to the federal government. David brought up a series of high-resolution photographs on the monitor. They were surveillance shots taken by federal agents over the past year. I immediately recognized Sydney's brand new luxury SUV, the expensive designer jewelry she flaunted at family dinners, and the boutique furniture in their apartment. The IRS has categorized these purchases as massive unreported capital gains. David continued, his voice taking on a clinical precision. Because the funds were derived from an illegal enterprise and deliberately hidden, they are subject to a devastating tax penalty. Yesterday afternoon, the IRS officially filed a jeopardy assessment against Donovan and Sydney. This means the federal government has completely bypassed the standard audit process. They have secured immediate, unilateral authority to seize every single physical and liquid asset in your sister's possession to cover the estimated tax liens. The realization washed over me like a wave of pure ice. Sydney's entire reality was evaporating in real time. My sister had spent her whole life mocking my career, calling me a lonely workaholic, and parading her lavish lifestyle as undeniable proof of her superior social status. She had genuinely believed her husband was a brilliant tech visionary, providing her with the elite life she inherently deserved. In reality, her entire existence was funded by a digital casino laundering ring, and the IRS was about to take the very clothes out of her closet. Sydney is going to lose absolutely everything, I stated, the words hanging heavily in the quiet boardroom. She already has, Arthur corrected me smoothly. While your sister was throwing a violent tantrum on your driveway last night, demanding the keys to your house, federal tax agents were executing a midnight seizure at her leased luxury apartment. They impounded her vehicles, seized her designer assets, boxed up her jewelry, and froze all of their joint domestic bank accounts. Sydney is not just homeless, she is financially radioactive. A sudden thought occurred to me, a terrifying realization about the way my family operated under pressure. My parents, I started, my voice tight, when they realized the regional bank had frozen the Apex credit line yesterday afternoon. Did they attempt to move their own money? David smiled, a cold, calculating expression that perfectly matched the severity of his forensic skills. You know your parents very well, Lauren. When Brenda realized the authorities were closing in, she panicked. She and Thomas attempted to shield their legitimate retirement portfolios from potential civil liability. But instead of hiring a legitimate asset protection attorney, they called Donovan for help. Arthur let out a harsh, unbelievable laugh. In an act of absolute unmitigated stupidity, Thomas wired over $500,000 of his clean retirement savings directly into one of Donovan's offshore crypto wallets, hoping to hide the cash in the blockchain until the investigation blew over. They commingled their clean money with a federal money laundering syndicate. I gasped, my hands gripping the edge of the mahogany table. Yes, David confirmed, bringing up the specific transaction hash on the monitor. And because that specific crypto wallet is currently under an active IRS seizure order for severe tax fraud, the federal government froze the entire blockchain node. Your parents' retirement fund is entirely gone, Lauren. It is locked down in a federal forfeiture proceeding. They will have to prove the clean origin of those funds in federal tax court, a process that takes years, and they will likely lose every single penny to the IRS penalties attached to Donovan's massive tax debt. I walked over to the expansive window, looking down at the busy downtown streets. The bustling city felt miles away from the absolute devastation raining down on my family. My parents had orchestrated a midnight break-in to steal my property because they were entirely desperate. They were not just trying to secure a house for Sydney. They were trying to secure a physical asset to borrow against because they knew their liquid wealth was trapped in a federal crypto seizure. Their arrogance had completely blinded them to the reality of the digital age. You cannot outsmart the federal government with a fake website and an offshore wallet. Arthur walked up beside me, handing me a sleek black folder. "These are the preliminary civil drafts," he said softly. "But honestly, Lauren, the federal government is doing our job for us. Between the FBI wire fraud charges, the IRS tax evasion seizures, and the money laundering indictments, your parents and your brother-in-law are facing total financial annihilation and decades in federal prison. We do not even need to push the civil suit aggressively. There is literally nothing left to take." I opened the folder, staring at the perfectly typed legal demands. The anger that had fueled me for the past 48 hours began to shift. It was no longer a burning, frantic rage. It was a cold, absolute closure. I closed the folder and handed it back to Arthur. "File it anyway," I instructed, my voice echoing with unshakable resolve. "I want my name on the docket. I want the public record to show that I did not back down. I want them to sit in a federal courtroom and watch my attorneys legally dismantle whatever scraps of dignity they have left. They treated me like a pawn for 34 years. Now I am the one clearing the entire board. Let us prepare for the arraignment hearings." Before I could even take a seat to begin reviewing the arraignment schedule, Arthur's office door swung open. His senior paralegal, a woman named Elena, who moved with the speed and precision of a military tactician, marched into the room holding a freshly printed stack of legal documents. She did not bother knocking. Elena said, her voice tight with urgency. "The county clerk just pinged our system. An emergency civil injunction was filed electronically 30 minutes ago against the suburban property. Someone is attempting to block the final deed from officially recording in the county registry." Arthur's eyes narrowed instantly. He snatched the papers from Elena's hands, his professional demeanor shifting back into combat mode. "The funds have already cleared the Federal Reserve," Arthur muttered, rapidly scanning the first page. "The title agency executed the transfer. This is a desperate post-closing Hail Mary." I walked back over to the mahogany table, my heart pounding a steady, furious rhythm against my ribs. "Who filed it?" I demanded. "My father is sitting in a holding cell, and my mother is currently being hunted by federal marshals for violating her bail conditions. They do not have the resources to file a sophisticated injunction." Arthur flipped to the second page and let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. "They did not hire a sophisticated firm, Lauren. They used a discount strip mall attorney who specializes in traffic tickets and desperate evictions. It seems Brenda handed this lawyer a packet of documents right before her bail was revoked, and he filed it blindly to justify a quick retainer fee." Arthur slammed the papers down onto the table and pointed to a scanned attachment. "They are trying to freeze the corporate title transfer using this." I leaned over the table and stared at the document. It was a standard, poorly photocopied residential lease agreement. The header claimed it was an absolute net lease granting full and exclusive tenant rights to Sydney and Donovan. The term was listed as a prepaid 5-year contract, completely locking up the property. But the most alarming part was the date. The document was dated exactly 2 years ago, right around the time my father had originally stolen my social security number. "This is an absolute forgery," I stated, my voice echoing loudly in the quiet corner office. "I never authorized my father to act as my property manager, and I certainly never signed a 5-year lease handing my multi-million-dollar asset over to my sister." Arthur tapped the bottom of the page. "Look at the signature line, Lauren. Brenda did not just forge your signature this time. She included a falsified power of attorney document claiming you granted her the legal right to execute real estate contracts on your behalf because you were allegedly out of the country on business. They submitted this to the county court under the penalty of perjury, claiming Sydney has an ironclad legal right to occupy the property and a right of first refusal on any corporate sale." The sheer audacity of my parents was staggering. Even while completely surrounded by federal indictments, their immediate instinct was to double down on the fraud. They were treating the United States legal system like a game of poker where they could just keep bluffing with fake paper. I pulled the document closer, my eyes naturally shifting into the analytical mode I used every single day as a licensed commercial real estate appraiser. I did not just read contracts. I dissected them for a living. It took me less than 30 seconds to find the catastrophic flaws in their forged masterpiece. "Arthur, hand me your pen," I said, my eyes scanning the fine print at the bottom margin of the lease. He handed me a red felt tip pen, and I immediately circled a tiny line of text in the corner. "Brenda is incredibly sloppy," I explained, tapping the red circle. "This is a boilerplate lease template you can download from a generic legal website for $20. But look at the copyright date in the footer. It clearly says copyright 2025. My mother dated this lease 2 years ago, which would have been 2024. She forged a retroactive contract using a legal form that did not even exist yet." David, the forensic accountant who was still standing by the corkboard, walked over and inspected my catch. He let out a low whistle. "That is brilliant, Lauren. That alone proves fraudulent intent." And it gets better. I continued flipping to the final page where the fake power of attorney was attached. I circled the thick black notary stamp next to Brenda's forged signature. "I know this notary. He used to work at the local community bank near my parents' house. His state commission expired 3 years ago and he retired to Florida. The state registry will easily confirm that this stamp is completely invalid." Brenda must have found an old copy of his stamp on a previous document and photoshopped it onto this fake lease. Arthur smiled, a terrifying expression of complete legal dominance. "They filed this injunction hoping the corporate developers would panic. When massive real estate firms see a long-term tenant dispute clouding a title, they usually throw a six-figure settlement check at the squatter just to make them go away. Your parents were trying to extort the buyers for cash to fund their criminal defense." Arthur picked up his desk phone and hit a speed dial button. He put the call on speaker. The lead counsel for the corporate developers answered on the second ring. Arthur quickly explained the ridiculous injunction and the hilariously flawed, forged lease that had just been filed with the county clerk. The developer's lawyer did not panic. He simply laughed, a deep, booming sound that filled the room. Arthur, the developer's counsel, said, his tone dripping with corporate arrogance, "We are a $2 billion real estate trust. We do not pay extortion money to suburban fraudsters. Our title insurance policy fully covers this exact scenario. I am deploying our top 3 civil litigators to the county courthouse right now. We are going to file an emergency motion to quash this injunction, and we are going to seek maximum financial sanctions against the discount lawyer who filed this garbage without verifying the documents." "I will send you the forensic breakdown Lauren just completed," Arthur replied, looking at me with absolute respect. "She already proved the copyright dates and the notary stamps are completely fabricated." "Excellent," the developer's counsel said. "We will have a county judge throw this out and finalize the deed recording before lunch. Give Lauren our regards. She is a spectacular partner to work with." The line clicked dead. Arthur immediately turned to his computer and began scanning the forged lease. A failed civil injunction was no longer just a county court issue. By submitting fabricated documents with forged signatures into a public legal registry, my parents had just committed perjury and evidence tampering. Arthur attached the scanned file to a new email, addressing it directly to the federal prosecutor overseeing the wire fraud and money laundering case. My parents thought a fake piece of paper would be their salvation. Instead, they had just gift-wrapped another 10 years of federal prison time and handed it directly to the prosecution. The walls were not just closing in on them. The walls had completely crushed them. I sat back in the plush leather chair, taking a deep breath of the air-conditioned office. I was entirely untouchable, backed by billionaires, and watching my abusers construct their own perfect demise. Arthur's desk phone interrupted the silence of the office less than an hour later. He answered, listened for a few seconds, and hung up with a highly satisfied smirk. The county judge took one look at the copyright date on that forged lease and threw the injunction out with extreme prejudice, Arthur announced, standing up and grabbing his suit jacket. The judge also issued an immediate bench warrant for the discount attorney who filed it. However, the title insurance underwriter requires you to sign a sworn fraud affidavit in person before they will release the deed for final electronic recording. We need to head back to the title company right now to put the absolute final signature on this transaction so the buyers can take legal possession. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my tailored skirt. "Let us go finish this," I said. We took the private elevator down to the garage and walked the 2 short blocks back to the title agency. The mid-morning sun was blinding, reflecting off the towering skyscrapers of the financial district. I felt a profound sense of momentum. The millions were already sitting securely in my wealth management account, but this final signature would permanently transfer the liability of the property to the corporate developers and completely insulate me from any further litigation. We entered the expansive marble lobby of the title company and were immediately escorted back into the same executive boardroom. The escrow officer, a seasoned professional named Diane, had the single sheet of paper waiting on the massive mahogany table. It was a formal declaration stating under penalty of perjury that I had no knowledge of the forged lease and that the title was entirely free and clear of any legitimate familial encumbrances. I picked up the heavy gold pen provided by the agency. I hovered the tip over the signature line, ready to close this toxic chapter of my life forever. Before the ink could even touch the paper, a massive crash echoed from the front reception area. The sound of shattering glass and shouting voices bled through the heavy oak doors of the boardroom. Arthur immediately stepped between me and the entrance, his hand instinctively reaching for the brass handle to lock it. But the doors were violently shoved open from the outside, slamming against the drywall with a deafening thud. Aunt Susan burst into the room, her face red and contorted with absolute fury. Right behind her was Uncle Richard, his fists clenched, looking like he was ready for a physical brawl. But the most shocking sight was the woman hiding behind them. It was Brenda. My mother had clearly evaded the federal marshals by fleeing Aunt Susan's house before they arrived, and now she was standing in the middle of a corporate title agency, looking like a cornered rabid animal. Her designer clothes were heavily rumpled. Her makeup was smeared in dark streaks down her cheeks, and she was clutching a crumpled, rejected copy of the civil injunction. "Stop signing that paper right now," Brenda shrieked, pointing a shaking, desperate finger at the escrow officer. "That property belongs to my family. That woman is a thief and a liar. You cannot legally record that deed." Diane, the escrow officer, remained completely unfazed. She pressed a silent security panic button under the edge of the conference table and looked at my mother with a mixture of professional pity and severe annoyance. "Ma'am," Diane stated firmly, "this is a secure corporate facility. You are aggressively trespassing. The county judge has already dismissed your fraudulent injunction, and the funds have been fully disbursed. This transaction is closed." "It is not closed until I say it is closed," Uncle Richard bellowed, taking an aggressive step toward the table. He puffed out his chest, trying to use his physical size to intimidate the room. "We know you are trying to steal the family wealth, Lauren. You are an absolute disgrace. Susan is live streaming this entire thing to the family Facebook group right now. We are exposing your corporate theft to the entire world." I looked at Aunt Susan, who was indeed holding her smartphone up high, the red recording light blinking steadily. She was frantically narrating the event into the microphone, calling me a sociopath who was making my mother a homeless fugitive. The sheer delusion was intoxicating. They actually thought a Facebook livestream would somehow override a federal wire fraud indictment and a standing county court order. They thought social media shaming was more powerful than the United States legal system. I did not cower. I did not hide my face from the camera lens. I slowly placed the gold pen down on the table, walked around Arthur, and stepped directly into the center of the boardroom to face them. "Richard," I said, my voice cutting through the chaotic shouting like a frozen blade, "you owe my father $10,000 that you borrowed 6 years ago to save your failing plumbing business. You never paid him back. Susan, you are currently sheltering a federal fugitive who had her bail revoked this morning for witness intimidation. And Brenda, you forged a fake residential lease using an expired notary stamp to try and extort a $2 billion real estate trust." Brenda recoiled sharply, as if I had physically slapped her across the face. "How did you know about the notary stamp?" she stammered, her eyes darting around the room in sheer, unadulterated panic. "Because I am a licensed commercial real estate appraiser," I replied coldly, taking a slow step toward her. "I read complex financial contracts for a living, and you are incredibly sloppy. Your discount lawyer is currently facing a bench warrant, and the judge just handed your forged lease directly to the federal prosecutor. You did not come here to save the house, Brenda. You came here because you are absolutely terrified and you have nowhere else to run." Uncle Richard lunged forward, raising his hand as if he was going to physically strike me or violently grab the affidavit off the table. But Arthur was faster. My attorney stepped directly into Richard's path, grabbing his wrist with a vice-like grip and twisting it downward with brutal efficiency. Richard let out a loud yelp of pain, dropping to one knee on the expensive corporate carpet. "Do not ever raise your hand toward my client again," Arthur growled, his voice vibrating with lethal authority. "You just assaulted a corporate attorney in front of multiple witnesses," Arthur told Richard, calmly adjusting his suit jacket with his free hand. "That is felony battery. And Susan, you just actively aided and abetted a federal fugitive fleeing from law enforcement. The federal prosecutor is going to have an absolute field day with both of you. The sheer ignorance required to broadcast your own federal crimes on the internet is genuinely astounding." At that exact moment, the shattered glass in the reception area crunched loudly under heavy tactical boots. 4 armed building security guards rushed into the boardroom, immediately grabbing Aunt Susan and pulling Richard off the floor, pinning them firmly against the wall. Susan dropped her phone in the struggle. The screen cracked loudly against the marble floor, cutting off her pathetic live stream instantly. But the security guards were just the opening act. 3 tall men wearing dark windbreakers with the bright yellow letters printed across the back stepped into the room. They were United States Marshals. They had tracked Brenda's cell phone location straight from Aunt Susan's house to the title company building. They did not shout or attempt to negotiate. They simply walked up to my mother, grabbed her arms, and spun her around. Brenda's desperate manic energy evaporated in a millisecond. The reality of the tactical vests and the cold steel of the handcuffs finally shattered her lifelong delusion of untouchable wealth. She was no longer a country club socialite dictating terms to her obedient daughter. She was a captured fugitive facing decades in a federal penitentiary. Brenda began to wail, a horrific guttural sound of pure defeat. "Lauren, please," she sobbed, her legs completely giving out as the heavy steel cuffs clicked into place. "I am your mother. Do not let them take me. I am so sorry. I will do whatever you want. Just give us the house, please." I walked back to the mahogany table, picked up the heavy gold pen, and looked my mother dead in the eyes as the marshals dragged her toward the boardroom door. I signed my name flawlessly on the bottom of the fraud affidavit. I handed the crisp paper to Diane. "Record the deed I instructed without a single ounce of mercy, and get these criminals out of my sight." The heavy oak doors swung shut, cutting off Brenda's hysterical sobbing as the United States Marshals dragged her out of the title agency. Aunt Susan and Uncle Richard were immediately handcuffed by building security and hauled away to wait for the local police. The chaotic, deafening noise that had plagued my entire existence was finally gone, replaced by the quiet, steady hum of the boardroom's air conditioning. Diane, the escrow officer, let out a long, shaky breath and turned back to her laptop. She smoothed her blazer, visibly recovering from the aggressive intrusion, and typed furiously for a few seconds before hitting the final key. The digital confirmation chimed softly from her computer speakers. "The deed is officially recorded with the county registry," Diane announced, her voice returning to its calm, professional cadence. "The transaction is fully executed. You are completely cleared, Ms. Lauren." I felt a profound physical lightness wash over my entire body. The multi-million-dollar burden was finally lifted. I turned to Arthur to thank him, but the boardroom doors opened once again. This time there was no shouting or shattered glass. A tall, strikingly elegant woman in a tailored charcoal suit walked into the room, followed closely by the developer's lead counsel, who had been on speakerphone earlier. Arthur immediately stood up, buttoning his jacket with a highly respectful nod. "Lauren," Arthur said, gesturing toward the woman, "I would like to introduce you to Victoria, the Chief Executive Officer of the real estate trust that just purchased your property." Victoria stepped forward and extended her hand. Her grip was incredibly firm, her eyes sharp and calculating. "It is an absolute pleasure to finally meet you in person," Lauren, Victoria said, a knowing smile playing on her lips. "Your legal team is exceptional, but your own forensic breakdown of that forged lease this morning was nothing short of brilliant. Our legal counsel was incredibly impressed by how quickly you dismantled your mother's fabricated documents." "Thank you," I replied, shaking her hand firmly. "But I have to admit I am slightly confused. Why is the CEO of a $2 billion trust personally attending a standard suburban closing? And why were you so eager to purchase a property heavily entangled in my family's legal nightmare? Victoria's smile faded into a look of absolute cold determination. She took a seat at the heavy mahogany table and placed a sleek leather folder in front of her. Because this was never just a standard real estate transaction, Lauren. My trust did not randomly select your house. We targeted it specifically. I glanced at Arthur, who simply offered a quiet, serious nod, signaling that he had known this all along. 8 months ago, Victoria explained. Leaning forward, my company suffered a highly sophisticated cyber attack. A shell corporation attempted to launder millions of dollars through our commercial escrow accounts using forged vendor contracts. Our internal security flagged the transaction, but the perpetrators vanished before federal authorities could catch them. That shell corporation was Apex Digital Solutions. The realization hit me like a freight train. Donovan had targeted a massive corporate real estate trust. When the FBI informed us that Apex was operated by your brother-in-law, using your stolen identity, Victoria continued, we realized Donovan was desperately trying to secure physical assets to hide his illegal capital. We partnered quietly with the federal task force. When your property hit the market, we knew Donovan would inevitably try to seize it to establish tenant rights. We purchased your house in all cash to ensure your family walked directly into an inescapable legal trap. We did not just buy a piece of suburban real estate, Lauren. We funded a federal sting operation, and we bought the final nail in Donovan's coffin. I sat completely stunned, absorbing the massive scale of the trap my family had blindly walked into. Victoria gestured to her lead counsel, who opened the sleek leather folder and spread a series of highly detailed forensic reports across the mahogany table. The developers' counsel looked at me with clinical precision. When Donovan attempted to defraud our trust, 8 months ago, he used a fabricated identity to initiate a series of electronic fund transfers, he explained, tapping a heavily highlighted bank ledger. Because those digital requests crossed state lines, they immediately triggered federal wire fraud statutes. But Donovan made a critical error. He did not mask the original IP address of his administrative login. He executed the fraudulent transfers using the primary wireless network at your parents' suburban house. I stared at the IP address printed on the report, recognizing my father's old internet service provider. Thomas and Brenda were hosting his cybercrime ring. I realized the absolute depth of their complicity finally making perfect sense. Exactly, Victoria confirmed, her voice cold and absolute. Your parents were not innocent bystanders who were simply manipulated by a smooth-talking son-in-law. They actively provided the physical sanctuary for his digital laundering. But the evidence goes much deeper. The counsel pulled a second document from the folder. It was a blown-up high-resolution copy of the forged lease Brenda had just filed with the county clerk. Next to it, he placed a copy of the forged vendor contract Donovan had used to attack the corporate trust. Look at the digital typography, the counsel instructed, tracing his pen along the margins. Notice the spacing, the identical font licensing errors, and the specific microscopic artifacts left by the document conversion software. Donovan created both of these forged documents on the exact same computer. Brenda did not just download a random lease off the internet this morning. Donovan built it for her, and she knowingly filed a document heavily linked to a massive federal wire fraud investigation. Arthur leaned forward, a shark-like grin spreading across his face. By submitting that specific lease to the county court this morning, Brenda officially tied herself to Donovan's corporate extortion scheme. The federal prosecutor now has undeniable forensic proof that the entire family was operating as a unified criminal enterprise. They connected the dots for us on public record. Victoria closed the folder with a sharp, definitive snap. We did not just want to block his transactions, Lauren. We wanted to entirely dismantle his network. By forcing them to desperately fight for this physical property, we made them expose their exact methods in a public court record. The wire fraud evidence is now permanently locked into the federal docket. They cannot retract it. They cannot hide it. You handed them the perfect bait, I said, looking at the undisputed proof of my family's total destruction, and they swallowed it whole, Victoria replied. The corporate trap had fully snapped shut. My family had finally encountered a predator entirely out of their league, and they were never walking free again. David walked back into the boardroom, his tablet glowing brightly in the crisp light of the corporate suite. He placed the device on the center of the mahogany table, displaying a live federal docket tracker that was actively refreshing. "The final piece of the board just fell," David announced, tapping the screen. "Donovan was apprehended 20 minutes ago at a private airstrip just outside the city limits. I was attempting to charter a flight to a non-extradition country using a fabricated passport funded by his offshore crypto wallets." I stared at the blinking red notification on the tablet. "He really thought he could just fly away from a massive federal sting operation," I said, shaking my head at the absolute delusion of my brother-in-law. "He severely underestimated the IRS criminal division," Arthur replied, leaning over to inspect the docket updates. "Federal agents were actively monitoring his digital footprint the moment he tried to access those frozen crypto nodes to pay the charter pilot. They intercepted him right on the tarmac. He is currently sitting in federal custody with absolutely no bail option, facing multiple counts of wire fraud, tax evasion, and international money laundering." "And what about my parents?" I asked, needing to know the exact financial status of the people who had orchestrated my misery for over 3 decades. "Brenda was just hauled away in handcuffs. But what happens to their actual assets now that they are officially tied to the fraud?" Victoria steepled her fingers, her expression completely devoid of sympathy. "When Brenda submitted that forged lease this morning, she legally implicated herself and your father in Donovan's criminal enterprise," Victoria explained smoothly. "That triggered a massive civil forfeiture clause. 10 minutes ago, the federal government officially seized the entirety of their clean assets to cover the investigative costs and the massive IRS tax liens Donovan generated." David swiped to a new screen on his tablet showing a series of bank account ledgers. "Thomas and Brenda are completely wiped out," Lauren David stated with cold precision. "The federal government seized their primary checking accounts, their emergency savings, and whatever was left of their legitimate retirement funds. The county has also placed a federal tax lien on the modest condo they were trying to rent out. They have absolutely nothing left. Not a single cent to hire a criminal defense attorney, and definitely no money to post bail. They spent their entire lives worshiping money and social status." I said, my voice remarkably steady, as I processed the absolute finality of their ruin. "They sacrificed my entire childhood, stole my identity, and tried to extort a corporate trust, all to maintain a pathetic illusion of wealth. And now they will be relying on an overworked public defender and eating standard prison rations," Arthur concluded, snapping his briefcase shut with a satisfying click. "Your financial and legal ties to them are permanently severed. You hold the clean cash from the corporate sale, and they hold the federal indictments." I looked at the zeroed-out accounts on the tablet. There was no sadness, no lingering guilt, and no familial loyalty holding me back. I was completely free. I thanked Victoria, and my legal team turned my back on the wreckage of my abusive family and walked out of the boardroom to finally start my actual life. The elevator ride down to the main lobby of the title agency was the quietest descent of my entire life. I walked through the sliding glass doors and stepped out into the blinding midday sun of the financial district. For the first time in 34 years, my chest did not feel tight with the looming anxiety of my family's next inevitable crisis. I pulled my phone from my purse and opened my private wealth management application. The screen loaded for a brief second before displaying my newly updated portfolio balance. The massive corporate wire transfer from the real estate trust had fully cleared the Federal Reserve. The 7-figure sum sat securely in my heavily encrypted accounts, completely untouchable by anyone sharing my last name. I walked 2 blocks down the busy avenue and entered the towering glass atrium of my private bank. I bypassed the standard teller lines and was immediately escorted into the plush office of my personal wealth manager, a sharp woman named Claire, who had been tracking the chaotic transaction all morning. "I am here to finalize the wealth allocation," I told Claire, taking a seat in the comfortable leather chair. "We are going to aggressively diversify the capital from the property sale into high-yield municipal bonds and commercial real estate index funds." Claire smiled, her fingers dancing rapidly across her high-end keyboard. "The funds are entirely isolated from any previous familial joint accounts," she confirmed. "You are completely insulated, Lauren." They could not touch a single dime of this money even if they hired the most expensive civil litigators in the country. Which they absolutely cannot do, I replied smoothly, leaning back and taking a sip of the sparkling water she offered. Because the federal government seized every single penny they owned an hour ago. 3 days later, I sat in the polished wooden gallery of the federal courthouse for the initial arraignment hearings. The massive courtroom was intimidating, lined with heavy oak paneling and guarded by multiple armed federal marshals. I wore a tailored crimson blazer, a deliberate choice to project absolute strength and unshakable confidence. Arthur sat beside me, his briefcase resting quietly on his lap as we waited for the bailiff to call the docket. The heavy side door of the courtroom opened, and the reality of their arrogant choices was finally put on public display. Brenda, Thomas, Sidney, and Donovan were led into the room by armed guards. They were all wearing oversized, brightly colored federal detention jumpsuits, their hands securely shackled to heavy chains wrapped around their waists. The sight of my incredibly vain mother stripped of her designer makeup and forced into a standard-issue prison uniform was staggering. Sidney looked completely hollow, her eyes red and severely swollen from days of relentless crying in a sterile holding cell. Thomas shuffled his feet, staring blankly at the floor, while Donovan looked completely terrified, realizing his smooth-talking charisma was utterly useless in a federal prosecution. As the marshals guided them toward the defense tables, Sidney caught sight of me sitting in the front row of the gallery. She stopped dead in her tracks, causing the chain connecting her to Donovan to yank sharply. Lauren, Sidney whispered loudly, her voice cracking with raw, unadulterated panic. "Please, you have to help me. They took my apartment. They took the cars. I have absolutely nothing. Tell the judge you will pay for my lawyer. Please, Lauren, I am your sister." The federal marshal immediately placed a heavy hand on Sidney's shoulder, forcing her to face forward. But I stood up from the wooden bench and stepped right up to the low barrier separating the gallery from the court floor. "You ceased being my sister the moment you tried to steal my house to fund a federal money laundering ring," I stated clearly, my voice carrying effortlessly across the quiet courtroom. "For my entire life, this family demanded my absolute compliance. You belittled my career, you mocked my independence, and you felt entirely entitled to the wealth I built with my own bare hands. You genuinely believed I existed solely to be an emergency financial resource for your catastrophic failures." Brenda looked back at me, tears streaming rapidly down her pale, unwashed face. "We are family," she sobbed pathetically. "You cannot just abandon us like this." "I am not abandoning you," I replied, my tone devoid of any lingering emotion or sympathy. "I am simply holding you accountable. You forged legal documents, you stole my identity, and you actively conspired to ruin my life. The federal indictments you are currently facing are the direct, unavoidable consequences of your own relentless greed. I will never pay for your defense. I will never visit you in a federal penitentiary. I will never answer another phone call, email, or letter from any of you for the rest of my natural life. You wanted my total financial independence. Well, you finally have it. I am completely done with you." The judge struck his heavy wooden gavel, demanding immediate order in the court. The marshals forcefully directed my family to sit down at the defense tables. I did not stay to hear the prosecutor read the massive list of felony charges. I had seen everything I needed to see. I gave Arthur a firm, appreciative nod, turned my back on the defense tables, and pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom. The heavy doors swung shut behind me, completely severing the chaotic, toxic noise of my past. I walked down the long marble corridor, my heels clicking sharply against the polished floor, echoing with absolute authority. I pushed through the front revolving doors of the courthouse and stepped out into the vibrant, chaotic energy of the city. The cool afternoon breeze felt entirely different today. It felt like pure, unadulterated freedom. I hailed a passing taxi and slid into the back seat, giving the driver the address to my corporate office. I was not going home to rest. I was going back to work, ready to close my next massive commercial appraisal, ready to build my own empire without the parasitic weight of my family dragging me down. Toxic family loyalty is a highly dangerous illusion. Society conditions us to forgive relentless abuse simply because we share a genetic bloodline. We are taught to set ourselves on fire merely to keep our aggressive, manipulative relatives warm. But blood does not excuse federal fraud, and genetics do not justify total financial extortion. Claiming your own power requires stepping entirely out of the toxic shadows of the people who desperately want to keep you small. I rebuilt my life from the ground up, aggressively protecting the boundaries I established. I bought a stunning penthouse overlooking the city skyline, entirely funded by my own ambition and the settlement from the corporate trust. The suburban house is gone, replaced by a massive commercial development. My past is securely locked away in a federal prison, and my future belongs entirely to me. Never apologize for demanding respect, and never hesitate to walk away from anyone who refuses to give it.